In today's episode, I create a town, add more detail to the station, and the scene comes together.
Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, That Model Railway Guy, and welcome back to another episode of my TT120 layout build. This is going to be a bit of a special one, as today I'll be finishing off the last of the scenic areas. But before we go any further, I do have to say a big thank you to Specialist Aggregates for sponsoring this video. More on them a little bit later on, and you'll get to see some of their products in use during the video too. Now, like I said, most of the scenery is now complete on Teaton. There's just a couple of areas left to do, which is probably a good thing because at the time of filming, the exhibition debut for this layout is less than 2 weeks away. While there's still lots of detailing to add across the entire layout, it's not going to be very good if I've still got patches of bare baseboard showing. So, as there's no time to waste, let's jump straight over to the layout and get stuck in. It really feels like I've passed a milestone with Teaton, and the layout is now looking more done than unfinished. Having completed the large yard area in the previous video, there's now just a small strip down the centre to do on the lower level. The main section that still needs lots of work though is up by Teaton station itself, which I plan to be a little town scene with rows of workers' cottages and even a factory. Now you might notice some rather large holes cut out of the surface of the upper level. With the main line running directly underneath this section, I need to make sure I can still get access to this area here in case there's a derailment or any kind of issue. At the moment it's possible to get in from behind or even the side to see what's going on, but that won't be possible once the back scene is bolted on and the layout is in its final position against a wall. So these cutouts will allow you to get access to the trains and also the point for the rear cut through in case of an emergency. Naturally though, I still want to be able to cover these up, and so I have a panel cut to fit the area which the town scene will sit on. This will be a removable section so that the majority of the time the holes are hidden, but if there's ever a problem the whole town can be removed for easy access. Like I said, I have a bit of a plan for this urban area already, which will mostly consist of these terraced houses that I've laser cut. Obviously these aren't quite finished yet, but it's enough to give you an idea of what I'm going for. Then down the side I have a low relief version of the terraced house and a little depot warehouse building too. Along the back of the scene will be more low relief terraced houses, and hopefully this will create some nice depth to the scene when I get all the roofs in place. Finally, in the far back corner I've got this large factory building I've designed which stands tall above all of the houses. And then to really kick things up a notch, I've made a big industrial chimney to go right in the corner. This is actually a 3D print, so far it's the largest thing I've 3D printed, and I've actually left it at 00 gauge size rather than scaling it down for TT120. By having it right in the corner though, it'll hide the join in the back scene, and it's big enough to make a statement without it dominating the entire scene. There is of course going to be a station building to add to the platform as well, which I'll show you later on, but for the most part I think this gives you a really good idea of how I want the town scene to look. Before I fix down the buildings though, I need to do some groundwork on the surface. As this section is removable, I can actually do this away from the main layout, which should allow me to work quicker. First off, I have some laser cut pavements for the buildings to sit on. These will just give everything a little bit of separation from the road surface. The pavements are then covered in a rough grey colour using some cheap acrylic paints. And while I could go all out with weathering these and giving them some texture, realistically I have to be aware that these are going to be at the back of the layout, hidden slightly amongst all the buildings. With limited time now before Teaton's exhibition debut, I do have to make sure I'm spending my time wisely, so in this instance a simple coat of grey paint is all that's needed. The surface of the board is also painted grey too, although in this instance it's just a base layer, as this will definitely be getting some more scenic treatment. The pavements can then be glued in place using PVA. Down the sides and back are the smaller strips that I'm using for the low relief buildings. Meanwhile, the central block is where the main section of terraced housing will go. And I'm being careful to make sure that the roads here are definitely wide enough for cars in TT scale. I can now start to add some texture to the road surface, with a base layer of PVA glue being the first thing needed. The tarmac asphalt scatter from Specialist Aggregates is then dropped into the glue, creating a nice textured surface for the road. And you'll know from the previous layout update video where I did the yard section that I really like using this stuff, and I still don't feel like I've used it to its full potential yet either. Once the asphalt is all down and the glue has dried, I'll clean up the excess using a small handheld vacuum. This is great for not only keeping the work area tidy, but it also means you can reclaim a lot of the leftover scatter for future use, so these vacuums are actually a really good little investment. At one end of the board I'm going to add an area of dirt, again with the PVA going down first. Universal ground cover from Specialist Aggregates is then dropped into the glue in exactly the same way as the asphalt scatter. And yeah, if you've seen any of the previous videos in this series, you'll know just how much I love using this stuff. At the opposite end, where the little depot building will sit, I've decided I want to create a smooth transition from the pavement down to the road. For this, I'm just adding a little bit of filler to the area to hide that join, which I can then smooth out. And once dry, this is then painted grey to match the rest of the surface. For the area down at the front near the station, I want to use a slightly different colour and texture here to differentiate it from the road. So here I'm using some Scenics powder from their pothole road kit, which I had left over from my 00 gauge build. And it's also important to add that you can layer up different products to create some nice effects. For example, adding some fine turf to create mossy or weed covered ground. And using additional powder on the road surface for some added wear and tear, just so the road doesn't look too pristine. I can also use the trail texture, which is a really fine powder to create some potholes in the surface too. You only have to look at the real world very briefly to see how nothing is consistently one single colour. Of course, with various textures layered over each other, it's a good idea to seal all these in place, which I'll do here using some watered down PVA. Here I'm just covering the entire area because even though there's several different textures in play here, it all gets sealed in the same way. Once dry, this will be nice and durable, so I won't have to worry about the surface chipping or getting knocked off, which is always handy for a removable part of a layout. Today's episode has very kindly been sponsored by Specialist Aggregates, and if you've been keeping up with this series, you'll know I've been using their scatter products pretty much across the entire layout. They've got an incredible range to choose from, which is expanding all the time, and honestly, I really do feel like it's a huge step forward, not just because of the different types of ballast that they offer, but they also have wagon loads too, and all kinds of ground cover as well, for like the road surfaces I've been using in this video, to things like dirt pathways and gravel drives too. You can check out their range at truetoscale.co.uk, and especially when it does come to ballast, you can see on their website what colour and what grade is right for the particular area of your own layout. Like I said, that's truetoscale.co.uk. I'll put a link to that down in the description, along with all the other products of theirs I've used in this video too, so you can try them out for yourself if you like. I highly recommend them. I think their stuff is really useful for any model railway, and a big thank you again to Specialist Aggregates for sponsoring this video. Moving away from the town scene for a moment, there is still this section on the lower level which needs some scenery. This will be the transition between the countryside scene and the shunting yard, and I'm planning to have a road here to try and blend the two together. Another set of laser cut pavements are glued in place for some more houses that I want to install in this area. Meanwhile, outside of the arches, I'm going to add a little bit more of the concrete texture powder to create a hard standing area. Once the PVA base is down, the grey powder is then sprinkled over the top to create the surface. A PVA base is then laid for the road too, which will continue on from both the level crossing and the road that runs behind the signal box round the field. The same asphalt texture from earlier is added to this glue to create the surface itself. Now, I mentioned the crossing a moment ago, and this is missing one crucial feature: some gates. Again, these are something I 3D printed myself. Apparently these are sized for N gauge, but to be honest, I think they work perfectly well for TT120, so I'm happy to go with them as they are. A quick coat of white paint was all that was needed, along with some red for the discs and the lamp on top, but these have turned out really nicely. And with the crossing gates now glued in place, I can fill in the gaps so that the fencing leads right up to them. With the glue on the road now dry, I can turn my attention to the surrounding area. Any final patches of bare baseboard are now getting a covering of PVA glue ready for some ground scenics to go down. Again, this is mostly going to consist of the universal ground cover, which is sprinkled over the top. The only area that isn't getting the ground cover is just down by the front here, where I'm using some of the universal base texture instead, and that'll help it blend into the surface I used for the signal box beside it. And as before, I'm going to seal all this in place with watered down PVA. Now, the following day, once all of the glue was dry, I decided to add some static grass to the area. Part of this was to do the area behind the pavements, just to create a garden area of sorts for the cottages that will sit here. But at the same time, I also wanted to have some patches of static grass on the dirt verges around the road, just like I did for the yard. A quick layer of 2mm static grass was then added to the glue. This is a mix of patchy grass with a little bit of spring mixed in too, just to stop it looking too lush and green so that it's distinct from the field behind it. It was then time to get the handheld vacuum out again, and clearing up all the excess here reveals the nice tufts of grass. The final step was to then get the buildings in place, and just like in the previous episode, these have very kindly been supplied by MS Models. I'm super impressed with these cottages in particular, and believe it or not, these actually haven't been painted. Obviously we've done some of the detailing like the doors and the chimneys, but for the overall colour, what you see is actually just the grey resin it was printed in, with some filler added into the mortar courses. As you can see, this creates a really nice effect and is super quick and easy to do. In addition to this, we also have the MS Models crossing hut, which sits nicely in this little area just beside the level crossing. And then up by the arches, I felt I needed something else to go here as well, so we've got the brick pumping room to go in the corner. Realistically, I'm not sure why the business inside the arch would need a separate pumping room, but I just really like the way this looks and it fills the space nicely. Overall, these buildings really finish off the scene, and it's great to have this little area finally finished, so now it's just the town scene that needs to be completed.
It's that part of the video where I really do have to say a huge thank you to everyone who has signed up to become a channel member. If you don't know, this channel really is kept alive by those who choose to support it by becoming members, and that support means that I can not only keep making these videos, but continue to improve them and make them better as well.
And of course, if you are a channel member, you get some extra benefits too, the big ones being exclusive videos and early access to certain videos like the ones in this series. The next episode in particular is going to focus on taking Teaton to its very first exhibition, and if you want to see how we got on with that, all the highs and the lows and everything in between, we'll just click the join button below this video if you're on desktop, or there's a handy link in the description if you're on mobile, and you'll be able to watch the next episode straight away. It's only £1.99, so nowhere near as expensive as Netflix or anything like that, but it really does help out, and some of the projects and layout builds that I do on this channel just wouldn't be possible without the support I get from my channel members. So a big thank you to everyone who has already signed up, and hopefully I'll see a few more of you in the members area really soon.
It's almost time to put the town section in place, but first I do need to add a little bit of ground texture around the end of the sidings just to cover up where the two sections will join together. Again, some PVA is spread around the area, and I'm deliberately going around the first of the cutouts here so that I know that the texture will definitely extend under the removable section. Then, as before, the ground cover is sprinkled into the glue just to create the surface texture before allowing it to dry. At this point, the base for the removable section can be put into position, and I've made some little supports for it too so that it now sits at exactly the same height as the platforms. I can now add in the various buildings and structures, starting off with that impressive chimney. The factory can then be added back in too. Then we have the low relief houses that will sit beside the factory. And not forgetting the buildings that go down the side of this section too. Then there's also the full relief terraced houses that sit on that central section of pavement. Finally, I've also laser cut a station building to bridge the gap between the removable section and the platform. I'm really pleased with how this looks. I wanted something that was worthy of a large terminus station, but I didn't want it to be so big that it would hide all the buildings behind. The end result is really nice though, and what I love about this whole section in particular is the different roofs and chimneys that you can see stretching back behind the station. Of course, there is one final major addition to add to this layout, and that is the back scene. Now, I can't take any credit for this whatsoever. This was painted by my dad, who originally wanted to use a photographic back scene, until I pointed out that he could just paint one himself. Apparently, this took only 20 minutes to do, which is crazy when you think about it, and it really does bring the scene to life. With the back scene in place and all the major scenery now complete, Teaton really does feel like it's finished enough for an exhibition. Obviously, I still want to add lots of little details across the layout before I display it in public, but for the most part that's just going to be set dressing, and it wouldn't be a total disaster if I missed something. That is going to be it for today's video though. I do hope you've enjoyed it, and if you have, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We are going to be covering the preparation for the exhibition and the show itself in the next episode, and here's a little sneak preview of what's coming up. The final details are added, Teaton goes on a journey, and the layout makes its exhibition debut.